Adminhtml, form and grid widgets. Okay, so bear with me on this because, as I mentioned before the break, Adminhtml, that area in Magento, with the design, there's lots of extra. There are lots of extra options. I'll put it that way. So let's look at, and unfortunately I can't get exhaustively into those extra options, but I'm going to try and help you understand the overall gist of what's going on. So basically in the Adminhtml area, we have this Adminhtml block widget class, okay? So if we want to leverage these Magento classes and conventions, it's actually a fairly simple thing to configure once you understand. So the big thing to get in your mind is that the admin pages are all just containers, and then containers for containers, and containers for containers. And we're dealing with, in a similar way as with the front end with blocks, well, we have these containers that contain each other. And in order to use this system, we have to define a block group variable, and we'll look at these other items here in just a moment. But basically, what happens is through simple configuration, we can actually create all of the classes we need without having to specify them. I mean, obviously we have to create them in our code, but the system will go ahead and try and instantiate them and use them. So, how does that happen? Well, just like with other blocks, the admin, the blocks have prepare layout. So, prepare layout, though, does some interesting things. So, prepare layout will set a child. So, this would set a child block, grid, and then it uses name grid, and then here we use, let's see, create block, this, block group, oh, so this is where our block group variable, so this is our create block call, right? So then we'll use whatever string we've specified for our block group, and then append this controller. I'll explain this controller in a moment, underscore grid. So if you've ever had to walk down the path of Adminhtml views, if you started your module kind of based on a Magento module, and then all of a sudden you were throwing these can't instantiate this class errors, well, this was why, because this was a structure that was being expected. So by virtue of specifying these two variables, well, we have to define this, we would have to make this block class. So I'll show you what this looks like in a second. Again, something a little more difficult to understand while I'm talking about it, much more understandable once I'm showing you. So in here we're also calling set save parameters and session true. I'll explain that in a moment as well. So again, we have this basic concept of containers containing blocks. Well, at the outmost we have Adminhtml block widget form container. So this one wraps around the form class. So that form class will be an extension of Adminhtml block widget form, because that's the class in Magento that handles forms. So this is sort of our meta class, if you will, for all of the elements of our form. And then ultimately down here we have variant data form, and this, using variant data form, gives us access to all sorts of different form controls. And this is the structure. This is on the final exam. So, just like several of our other UML diagrams, you'll see, well, one of the nice things to note is all of this springs forth from variant object. But what we have are all sorts of different elements. So we have the form itself, the block widget form, and the container. And then we have, select elements, text elements, field set elements. These are all important, but of course you don't need to have this UML in your head while you're building out Adminhtml views. All right, Field sets. Well, what are field sets? Of course, they are containers for fields. So, what would I like to discuss in here? So, get children HTML, sorted elements. So, what we have to do is we have to define define some element types in order to add fields to our field set. So, let's see. A couple of things to point out here. So, for a field set, there's a very handy thing. I don't know if you ever need to render something after, render some HTML or JavaScript in your admin. You can actually set the after element HTML property, and that will be rendered outside of the field set container. So basically what we have here, just like within any HTML form, you have field sets, and that field set would contain fields. So we add fields to a field set. So what kind of fields can we add? What kind of elements do we have? Well, we have a lot of them. And if you would like to find them, you would look under lib variant data form element. And then, of course, you'd be more than welcome to create your own if you need it. So, add field. What does that call look like? Well, we would need to pass in some ID to use, and then pass in, let's see, we'll pass in a type. This will specify, this will be actually used to instantiate one of these classes. And then, let's see, we'll look at config and after as we go through the code. All right, so one of the things, again, just like with field sets, if you need to render some code immediately following a field, you can specify basically some JavaScript or HTML for the after element HTML property of these field classes, and that'll be rendered. And again, we're pointing out the same thing holds true for field sets. So, variant data form configuration. So, let's say we are setting up a new variant data form, and you see here we're using new, and that's because these don't have a factory method associated with them, so they are instantiated directly. Mm-hmm. So in this case, we're adding a field set, and then, so create a field set, and in this case, we're adding a class, and the legend that would be displayed. So hopefully you're familiar with HTML and how these are actually just literally HTML elements of, or aspects of field set, legend, attribute, thank you, attribute of the field set, and then once we have our field set instantiated, we can start adding fields to that. So in this case, using our example here, so we'll add a field with animal ID, and it's going to be a hidden, so HTML, just a hidden input. And here we pass in some config information. The name, so this would be the name, this would ultimately be part of the post, right? And then the value. So what we do right here, so if you can imagine we're in an edit. So the same screen that we would use to create a new something, we would also use to edit that something. That's a pretty common paradigm in MVC. And if the way we would populate that field, the way we would populate the values in that field would be to get an instance of a model. So if, for example, we have a model, so we could either test for the presence of the model, but better to test for the model and whether or not it has an ID. Because if it has an ID, then this is obviously coming from a database, and we'll need to assign the correct value to the name. I'm sorry, yes. The correct, basically set up the correct association for the post data. And down here we're adding another field called name, the name of which will be name. And for the label and title, we're using our translate to get to translate the string. However, now we no longer have to we no longer have to use the Mage class to do this. We can actually, the helper is available in the scope if we're using ours, and we can just simply specify this. And we'll see that in the code. But anyway, the takeaway from this example is that create the form, create the field set, add it to the form. And then to the field set, we add fields. And this is simply the syntax for our edit object. So we have to do some setup. We'll say object ID, animal ID, okay, block group and controller. This controller is unfortunately named. It's not necessarily the controller that we're on. That's probably, I think, the last thing I have to apologize for. Just simply consider these two string parameters that you have to define, and based on what you have here, that will affect what class is instantiated. Let's see, so in our form, we'll call this prepare form and pass our, establish our model that we'll then be able to use and call inside that form so that we can get data if we've posted a parameter with some sort of entity ID. We can instantiate that model, and from that model, get our values that will pass into the fields, or get our values that will pass into the fields. Okay, so creating a form. All right, you'll need 2 actions to edit. Let's see, and then you'll have one for saving your form. So you have to post that data somewhere, of course, and then you have to have the action to view the form. And then we have the layouts. So these also use the layout update. However, if we follow Magento's design and we want our forms to look and act like Magento forms, the layout for these are very simple. We simply declare one block and then we're done. Magento will instantiate the rest. So, and we can see that here. So for some action, Adminhtml animal list. All right, we're referencing, so we're adding on to the content node like we've done before, and we specify the block type and name. And then once we've done this, we're good. Now, let's jump over to grids for a second. So if you're looking at some, for example, the manage product screen, well, that first view is a grid. And grids have a few components to them. The filters, those are the things at the top of the grid that you can use to filter your result set with which you're working. And that set save parameters and session call is actually how you would be able to go to the catalog area, set some filters, bounce maybe somewhere else to the admin, come back, and those filters are still there. And that's optional for you to call.
Can you define the grid a little bit deeper than that?
Yeah, well, I mean, a grid, let me show you a grid. That's right, you haven't had much experience administering this. Thank you. That's actually a very good point. So, this is a grid in Magento. So what I did here, it's just like anything else. So I'm on the admin catalog product controller, and this is obviously the index action, and this is a grid. So the elements that I have here are filters, and one of the behaviors in Magento, as I was just mentioning, is in this screen, if I set up some sort of filtering and hit search, and unfortunately, this submit is for this, and search is for this. This interface was clearly designed by programmers. Yes.
Did you use reverse English notation?
It's very, very functional.
Not true. You keep saying it, but I know it's not.
So, and there's simply actually, and earlier in one of the slides we saw set save parameters in session, and this actually, what that means is if that's true for, if that's true here, then what's going to happen is once I hit search, The filtering parameters will just be saved in my session, and then that way I can bounce around to other areas of the admin, or I can go and edit a product, come back, and I'll still have that same filter in operation. So I have filters and sorters, so I can these are the sorters up here, so I can choose some single thing to sort, by which to sort, and set the direction, ascending or descending. All right? And then I have the actual data itself, right? And then I can have totals. There aren't any totals here. You can have totals for certain rows. Obviously, totals you would see in the sales order screen. So I'll show you another example here. Let's see. Oh, I can't because I haven't sold anything. I'm a terrible store owner. But you could have some sort of totals here. Reports will have totals, that kind of thing. So, again, this slide might be sort of a, well, duh, a grid. Of course, it's going to probably have these two utilities and data. No kidding. So with grid, though, we have yet some more stuff going on. But fortunately, that's basically the end of what we have going on. So with a grid workflow, all right, so in your constructor, prepare layout is called. 2HTML is called. Before 2HTML is called. All of this is happening automatically. What happens with grids, though, is that we get this method, prepare grid. Prepare grid, we have a few things going on. Prepare columns, prepare mass action block, and prepare collection. So let's look at these a little bit more in depth. All right, so a prepare columns call. So, I mean, this is, I have to show you this in order for these things to make sense. So, this slide here is basically just to show you, because all blocks do this, right? For grids, though, before 2HTML, we'll call prepare grid, and prepare grid gives us access to these three things here. So, prepare columns. Well, what do we do in prepare columns? Well, we just add columns. So we can represent, so obviously like our catalog product entities, tons of data, but we only want to show a certain number of things. So we take from our collection and specify which ones we want to, which items we want to use. So here we're saying, this ID, this animal type, this name, okay, index, name, type, edible. Where do those indices come from? Well, they come from, in this case, they come from animals, but the animals, how do the animals get in there? Well, prepare collection. So we have to call, so that's the other method in prepare grid, prepare collection. So we call, in this case, our collection, mage get resource model training animal collection. And we just set it on this object. Once we do that, then the columns for the rows in our collection, we can connect them to the grid via add column. So if I have some entity attribute in here, foo, I could go down here, and for one of my indices, I could say foo. Make sense? That's the mapping. There are a number of different methods available for us. Obviously, we can set a class name, a column. There are also renderer callbacks that we can add in. The code is full of them. So unfortunately, I can't exhaustively go through them, but I can say just simply, in here, look, options we can use a
Like the source model?
source model. So here, in fact, why do I have to do this? Well, I want to use this source model and then get my option values, but be able to store them and render them. That'll work through here. that'll convert 0 and 1 to yes and no, or in this case, yes, no, maybe. So we haven't made this class yet, but we will in a second. All right, so that leaves us with prepare mass action block. And the mass action block is here. This thing up top. That's the mass action block. So any questions about that? So that's the fundamental thing that we do in grids is we use prepare collection to assign to get a collection and assign it to the grid class, and then we pick the data from the collection that we want to display in the grid using prepare columns and add data. Or add data. I was just looking at that. Add column. We also, if we're using, if we're basically piggybacking on Magento, we can actually get access to Ajax. So we can use set use Ajax. So for here, we'd have to have another action just so that we could return, because what's going to happen is as we work with the grid, when we post, we don't want to get the entire content back. We only want just that block. So, and we'll look at that, what that looks like. So that would require another action, but it's easy. The key thing here is that in order to use Ajax for our grid, we just simply call set use Ajax. So make a new action, and in that new action, just for the layout for our new action, just refer to our single block and not the entire content node that we've been specifying. We'll see what that looks like in a second. So, and here we go is an example of using prepare columns. So calling add column and specifying an array of options. Yeah, so setting up a collection. Well, here in prepare collection, well, we're getting a collection, but for the catalog products, okay, well, in our case, so this, I guess, is from the catalog module. So this would be the product collection. And rather than loading the entire record, we're just simply adding these attributes that we know we're going to use in the grid. So we'll have our static entity attributes, and then we're adding these EAV attributes to that collection. And here we're doing a join so we can get the catalog inventory. And this is maybe the one spot where it gets, it's a little odd, but this is because, you know, most of the time you see joins in resource models. This is the one case where you'll see them, where you should see them outside. And this is when we are doing what blocks do, and that is initializing the model data that they need. And again, we're basically under prepare layout. So the same paradigm holds true. Using prepare layout, we have just a couple of method calls down. So the grid container is declared similarly to the form. We specify a block group and a controller. There we go. And I'll discuss the action here as we go through the exercise. So the grid, obviously we have this layout definition, and then we have the two actions if we want Ajax. Grids in a container. And yeah, that's about all I say. Now, let's just get to it. So this is by far the longest exercise that we have. So we should all have our animal controller made, and here we have index action. Now, what are we doing with the index action? Well, we're redirecting to a list action. So why would we do this? Well, because if we're seeing a grid of stuff, it's nice to actually, it would be nice to actually see that as a list action rather than an index action. So all right, so let us look at all of these things that we're doing here. So here are here are the actions and related methods. So what do we have here? So obviously each of these is a page, right? For our module. So index just simply forwards to the list. So that way we don't have to specify a URL. We can just go and get to our grid, because our grid is really the main action that we want. Don't have to do that, but we're doing that just to keep it nice and pretty and logical. So, and here we implement is allowed, so we can incorporate the ACL check for these routes. Now, the grid action for the AJAX requests. That's one thing. So here, we need to simply load layout, render layout. For the new action, so we can go and say, okay, well, let's go to a new route. You know, if we want to create a new entity, well, here we're just going to forward to the edit action. So far we've got two of those now. Our index action is list, and our new action is edit. No need to create separate new and edit views. So our edit action, well, okay, we have to do some stuff in here. What does this look like? Well, okay. Mage get model. So here, we're going to get our training animal model. And that was the one that we created under design, Adminhtml, default, layout, training, animal.xml. So app design, Adminhtml, default package, default theme, layout, training, animal.xml. And why is it there? It's there because in my module configuration, that's what I specified. C app code local, training, animal, etc config.xml.
Is there a way to copy the whole file? I only can copy the screen I saw.
Okay, so who can tell me for our, the grid is our list action, right? So who can tell me which of these instructions will be used for the layout? Yeah, Adminhtml animal list. This is going to be calling load layout without any parameter. So the only way any of these instructions would ever be used is if they match our router node, controller name, list, and action. So Adminhtml animal list. And as long as you are rewriting the Adminhtml or adding your module into Adminhtml, your layout XML for your admin part of your modules will always begin with Adminhtml, because that will always be the beginning of your route. So Adminhtml animal list. Now you can see what we're doing for the grid action. So the grid action is our AJAX action, but all we want to do for AJAX with the grid is just simply get the grid block back. Well, remove name root. So we're getting rid of the rest of the layout, specifying a block and an output. So that's what we've done.
Grid loads in list.
Exactly. Well, no, the list view loads the grid. This is what our AJAX action would hit just to give us our grid block, because that's the only one that will be replaced. Because if we specified our list action again, then we would see basically our page inside our page. inside our page, inside our page. And that's like Googling Google, man. Okay, now, down here, obviously, which one of these instructions would apply for our edit action? Edit! All the way from the back of the room, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so here we're adding, let's see, content, adding the content block, adding the content block. Oh, and here we have some tabs over here. So we can have tabs. Weekend has tabs. All right, so let's go back to our controller now that we see. All right, so here's our list action. All right, load layout, that's going to call that layout instruction. And here's our grid action, same thing. Load layout, render layout. Of course, we're not doing anything with the rest of the page, so we don't need any of this other stuff. Okay, so that's that. And obviously, theirs is allowed for our ACL check. Now, new action, again, we're basically just referring new action over to edit. So what's going on in our edit action? This is obviously a little more complicated. Well, we get an instance of our training model, our training animal model. We register this in the registry. So now we would be able to refer to current animal simply by calling mage registry current animal, and that would get an instance of our object. And you can see here, though, that we haven't loaded anything. We just have an empty instance of our model. Now, in here, this is a similar. You would have, if you've built any kind of web application with administrative forms, you've done something like this. You have to get the request object and extract the ID, if there is one, from it. So this would be similar to going into, the post array or the get array and grabbing this ID parameter. If there is an ID parameter, well, then we'll try and load. And here we actually will throw an exception if there is an ID parameter because something happened. If we have an ID parameter but we don't get an ID when we try and load the model, then obviously something bad has happened and we need to inform them. But generally, that would only happen if somebody were putting that in directly. All right, so up at this point, we have registered our model, and we've loaded it if we have it. Now, in the case that we do have the model, well, let's go ahead and change the title on the page. We'll say, hey, we're editing whatever our model name is, okay, and whatever type of animal it is. If not, so basically the two things we're doing in this function, because edit is serving the dual role of edit and new, we basically at every step we need to make sure that we're handling both of those conditions. So over here, we're changing the page title to reflect that we're editing an existing model, or we say, hey, we're creating a new animal. And here we're changing the page title, or adding to that HTML title. Catalog animals and either new animal or edit, zebra. Or edit Ben the zebra. And here we're setting breadcrumbs, again, just because we're scared that one day Magento will implement them. Of course, set the active menu, catalog training. But again, the same features so the different areas here are model load, conditional stuff for, page view, and then load layout, render layout. And that, of course, we'll get the instructions from animal XML edit action and load these two blocks. So that is that. Also here in this controller, we have a save action and a delete action. So the thing is, we have to post our data somewhere from our form, We'll post to our save action. And you can imagine, just suffice it to say that in our save action, obviously we have to process this information. So in the event that we have an ID specified, so again, we grab an ID from the request object, well, then we go ahead and load the model. And here we simply call add data, because the assumption is that our form, the form fields, mimic whatever data would apply to our model anyway. So it'd be one spot where, you might one thing I might see as an improvement would be, based on the model prototype, the attributes available, if unless you specify otherwise, then that we would actually be able to build the form fields automatically based on our model prototype. That's just something that isn't implemented. But here we use this add data call to just take our array of data and from our post object, or our post array, and press it onto our model, call model save. So assuming this went well, it's in a try-catch block, we get the session and we're going to add a success message. So then the next page that rendered, this would be, oh hey, that nice green box. It says animal was successfully saved. So then we go ahead, reach up into the session, and set form data to false. And here's where we check the back parameter, which will be sent by our save and continue button, which will take us back to our edit form after the save. Now, this redirect, this is something you'll see in lots of places. Now, this notation, **edit, means current module, current controller, edit action. That's what that syntax means. So if we passed in back, then we go to the edit screen, and we're going to end up, we pass in this ID param, so we'll end up back at the edit screen, and I'll talk more about this in a second because this is used everywhere. So basically you have save in Magento often and save and continue. So save would just take you back to the list action here, but if we do save and continue, well then we are posting in this back param, and we just simply grab our ID, feed that into the edit action, and we'll basically reload. It's a nice feature. In case something happens, well, we do a similar thing that we do up here. This gets session, but instead of add success, we add error. That'll give us a red box. And we just simply state the message that we've been given. So whatever error was thrown. And in this case, well, if we still have the model, well, we'll go back to that edit screen. And if not, well, we'll just go back to the new screen. Well, in this case, we have the new action, yeah. So that would send us back to the edit screen, and that would send us back to the edit screen, and we would just be creating a new animal. Okay, so now then the other condition that we handle, so this whole if statement, basically we're checking the post for some sort of data. Otherwise, somehow we've arrived at the save action without any data, and then that is its own kind of error. So get session, add error with no data found to save. So that would then forward us back to module and controller. So basically our controller's index action here in this case. All right, and then the last method that we need is the delete action. And this is our complete CRUD interface for our entity in the admin. Delete action, obviously, well, we'll expect to receive an ID of something to delete, else, hey, well, we can't do anything. And then in this case, we just simply load the name from the model, call model delete, like we saw in our models lesson, and add a success message. In this case, of course, we're saying, the animal name with this ID was successfully consumed, because we're ever so witty. And then redirect back to current module, current controller, index action. Okay? So I will go ahead and I'll tell you something here. This structure that you see here. So if you're looking at this, administrative piece and saying, oh, this is basically what I'm going to need to do for my entities, you will have a structure very much like this, because you'll notice that all I'm doing for my grid is specifying one block. And then I'm getting all sorts of content here. Now, for my edit, I have all these other blocks that I have to declare as well. Now, but here I'm only declaring 2 of them. But you see all those other blocks in the system. Well, the thing is, those are instantiated automatically. So let us look at what we have. So let's see what this looks like in the admin. And once I've verified that this is working, I will give you a copy. Oh, did I not copy? There we go. Ha. Sweet. So this is my, you can see here if I go to my index action, I'm simply forwarded to my list action. Now, so let's look at our class and see everything we have here. Okay, so well, let me see. Catalog, manage animals. Let's see, list animals. And you see up here, animals, catalog, Magento. So for list animals, let's see, where did that come from? So I didn't actually specify for this view, I didn't specify my grid at all. Right? You see that? I just simply specified this other one. Now, what I had to do, though, was declare. So this is my training animal block, Adminhtml animal. So this is the block that's being called in here in the list. Wow. Okay, so this is me setting up the grid. And to set up the grid, I define the block group and the controller. And actually, I can swap this out with this. This is now the correct way to do this, with this. Got this? This is our first step. And this first step will always extend from, will extend from mange admin.html block widget grid container. So again, we're just setting up the container for our grid block. And based on what we have for our training, for our block group and controller, that then in turn specifies what we're going to name our grid. So because what's happening is prepare layout's being called. So prepare layout will automatically set a child. So here, a child named grid, and the block that it creates is going to be the block group. So again, this is our
map to our module.
exactly. So we just have to. It's going to, if we're using our block, we certainly need to specify our class group name for our blocks here. So
it's our class group.
yeah, so create block. Yeah, create block, and my class group name is training for blocks. So training, and then we specify this controller. So this controller here, we're specifying admin.html animal. So that tells us the class that we need to make. Training, so training animal block, admin.html animal grid. That then whatever we specify here, that's the class we're going to need to make. And this basically for
grid.
for a grid, exactly, it'll be /grid. So, and that's denoted up here. Actually, I could have shown you right here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and then here, obviously, we're setting the header on the page. So that's where that list animals comes from. So then, that means we need to create the grid class. And this one, obviously, is a little more involved. So let me provide you with this. Obviously, if you want custom options rendering, here, and our source model is very simple. It extends from the Boolean source model, and here we just, of course, redefine, redeclare get all options, and that way we can. In fact, I could do the same thing here. Call. Okay. This could replace all of these with this. That was just a copy-paste artifact.
So what shall we see? The label?
Yeah, right now you should see this.
No.
What do we have going on here? So if I say add new, obviously I'm going to go to my new screen. And we opted to set up this tab over here. You could configure other tabs and have other other sections showing up here, if you so choose. But in our case, we just have this one general tab. So what should happen, of course, now where does this information come from? This is the edit form, right? But I'm still on this new route. So I'm not changing the URL, but I'm really at my edit action. So the connection here in the code is, let's see. Now, what's going on here? All right, well, in our edit action, we extend from the form container. Now this obviously connects with the layout XML. In the edit action here. So all I'm doing here is in the left block assigning my tab, and that'll have a specific form, and here's that class. Now, and then for the content area, I'm just specifying training animal block admin.html animal edit. And that's this class. So in here I specify my block group again, training admin.html animal, and a mode. So here we show you what happens with this construct. So in prepare layout we have the block group training / admin.html animal, and then we add the mode to that edit, and then we add form. So that's how that gets. That's how we know what class we're going to have to create. So it'll be whatever. This will be our class group, and then this will be the path underneath our block folder and append an underscore edit and underscore form to that. That will set up our form. So this is a container for our form. And then in prepare layout, which is our block initialization, we have a couple of buttons here. So we update a button that was already created in somewhere else. So here we call parent prepare layout. That's where that button is created. And instead of add button, we just call update button. And this is how we can change the label for that. So save is save animal, and delete is eat animal. And here we're adding another button, save and continue. And we just simply, if you want to use save and continue in your module, you just simply specify on-click, save and continue edit. And here we add to the form scripts array. So here we're simply adding a back parameter. We're basically taking the action on the submit. So we're using prototype here, grabbing the action, and then we're appending back edit to it. So that would be basically, and internally that would become, for Magento, that would be part of the query string, essentially. So that would be read in as a variable at the end of the URL. And that was where, that was in our controller. All right, so in that save action, so of course, let's see, in our edit action, let's see, this is where that back param is passed in, and in here, in save, we check for the back param, and pass back and redirect back to edit. Other than that, we are just getting the header text, and if we are, if we have an animal, well, we're going to just append make a nice little header that has the animal name and type from the model. Or we'll just return, well, we know that we're creating a new animal, so we'll just use new animal. And that's the case here in the screen. So you can say, yummy beef. Beef. Actually, we'll just say cow. And is edible? Yes. Not even maybe. It's a yes. So save and continue edit. So now I'm posting to the save action. And I get my notification, and then I get my information back with this information. Now, if I go to manage animals, what's in my zoo? I should. Perfect. Now, for my grids, let's see. Let's go back to the grid here. So there's obviously a lot going on in the grid. And let's see. Okay. So let me look at the elements in the grid here. So for all the columns in the grid, they'll be specified here in prepare columns. I'm adding the ID, the type, the name. These are all attributes of this class, or attributes of the class. Columns in this case. It's a nice flat model. And then this last parameter here, action. This is simply going to give me a link. All of these params that we pass in obviously do things. The header will be the header for the column. Width would obviously be the actual width that will be applied to the style. Type here, I specify action. Actions here, I get, look at this. Let's see. The getter method gives me the value from the object, so I get the ID of whatever datum is, whatever entity is in that row. So I'll get each row's ID and pass it in. So here we say, all right, I want that action to be, I want it to say edit. This is where I want it to link, and then this is the field I want it to link to. And I can set whether it's filterable or sortable, and obviously for action they all say edit, so I wouldn't want that at all. All right, and then at the end of prepare columns, you always call return parent prepare columns. All right? Now, get row URL. What is that? Well, that is simply, if I define this, that means I can click anywhere on the row, and this is the action that will be called. So I can just click that row anywhere, and I should be taking the edit action for that ID. Now, get grid URL I have to have for my Ajax. So if I've specified that I'm using Ajax, which I have, then I will say, I need to use the grid action. And that is, if you recall what we defined, this action in Animal Controller is just load layout, render layout, and that's the one in layout XML where we remove basically all of the other blocks and just simply add our grid as a content block, or as an output block. So that's what's going on in the grid. And the construct here is where we set it up to use Ajax. Now, so to have Ajax in your grid is very easy because all we have to do with the construct for our grid is set use Ajax. Then we'll need to define get grid URL so that we know that's where we tell the Ajax where to post to get just that content. And so because we're posting to this action, then we have to go into Animal Controller and define the grid action. And for us, we're really using that XML that we've learned so much about. Load layout, render layout. Well, obviously, this is Adminhtml animal grid. So if we look at that here, again, that's where we remove all of the other blocks from the system. Well, we remove the main output block. So that and its children won't be instantiated. And then we just simply add our block as an output block. So now for the last piece, because the tabs are ancillary. So for our form, so you recall in our edit block, which is our container for our form. So once we set the edit mode, then it's block group, controller, mode, and then append form. So then we would have an edit folder and a form.php file. This is where we set up the form. So we're calling prepare form, instantiate the form, and let's see, specify the ID for the form, the action to which we post, and our method. And if we specify multi-part form data all the time, then we would be able to post files as well. Back to our layout XML for our edit action, we simply call training. We simply instantiate the container class, which then calls our form class. All right. So in our general tab, because we put this in a tab here. All right, this is where we're actually setting up our form itself. So this is that field set in the form. And all we're using is add field.
If our animal entity would use, we're using an EAV resource model, we could simply pass an array of attributes and we would get our form automatically. But since we're using a flat resource model, we're missing the information about our animal attributes, and we have to specify the form fields manually.
So again, we have to initialize the form object, and here we're just setting up some data.
Again, if you remember from before, we can add a field set.
So we create a field set for the form, and then we add our fields to that field set. And that's it, really. So the field, adding a field looks like passing in the name to use, the ID to use, and what type of field it is. So these would come from those variant form elements. And then this config array. So label, a CSS class, whether or not it's required, and then the actual name attribute that will be used. And the nice thing is, as long as these names match up here to what we get from our entity, well, we can call form at values, and then this get form data basically will pass in the information from our entity. It's 100% crystal clear now, right?
Hope so.